Okay, next we're going to be looking at triangle similarity shortcuts. Now, first of all, remember that when we're talking about similar figures, we're saying that they are the same shape but different sizes. That happens because we know that the corresponding angles are going to be congruent. That's what's going to give them some of that same shape. Different sizes. The sides don't have to be congruent, but they do need to be proportional. That's what gives us similar figures. So here if we have triangle ABC, similar to triangle XYZ, we know that our corresponding angles, A and X, are congruent, B and Y are congruent, C and Z. We know that those are corresponding parts by the way that's written. We would also know, because of the way this is written, that segment AB would correspond to XY, and so they would need to be proportional. Then we would have our BC proportional to YZ and AC proportional to XZ. Now, when we're talking about similarity shortcuts, if you remember back to when we were talking about congruent triangles, we had 4 shortcuts that we used to prove triangles are congruent. They were side, 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 angle, side, angle, side, angle, and side, angle, angle. Those were the 4 shortcuts we used for proving triangles were congruent. Well, now what we're looking at, same idea, only now instead of the triangles being congruent, we're just looking at what shortcuts can we have for similar triangles. All right, and so remember when we're looking at this, what we're really saying is to have these triangles be similar, boy, that's a lot of information. Do I really need all of that? All right, and the first piece that we mention is that the corresponding angles need to be congruent. Well, we've already shown in different examples and different videos that if I know 2 angles in one triangle are congruent to 2 angles in another triangle, then that third angle has to be congruent because we know all triangles add up to 180. And that really kind of is the first part of one of our shortcuts, is that I don't need all 3 angles. All I really need are 2. And if I have 2 angles in one triangle, so here's a triangle, and we have these two angles congruent, and then I have another triangle that has congruent angle there, then I would know that these third angles need to be congruent as well. Not only that, just because of these 2 congruent angles here, that would mean that those 2 triangles have to be similar to one another. In our very first example that we're looking at, that's what we have is we're asked, are these 2 triangles similar? Well, because angle U and angle S are congruent, and angle W and angle Q are congruent, then that's enough information to be able to say, yes, these 2 triangles are similar to one another. So we have similar triangles with that first shortcut of angle, angle. And when we're looking at that, when I go back to, okay, well, let's let our congruent shortcuts kind of guide us. Notice I have angle, angle there and angle, angle there. That's enough information then that I don't need to do any more investigating with those 2 because angle, angle kind of takes care of it. So the other 2 I want to look at for similar triangles, shortcut-wise, is side, 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 and side, angle, side. Now, when we're looking at these for shortcuts, remember, we're not saying that the sides are congruent to one another. We're saying that those corresponding sides are proportional. So if I have 2 triangles, say this is 3, and this is 4, and this is 5, and then I have another triangle, and this is 6, and this is 8, and this is 10, is that enough information to say that those 2 triangles are similar? Well, if you remember these numbers, 3, 4, 5, we just finished doing right triangles, and we would know that those triangles are both right triangles, and the reason that works is because of our similarity conjectures. All right, and we're just multiplying by 2. That's giving us proportional sides. We would also know other things about these, but that's enough to be able to show us that side, side, side does work for a shortcut. And if I use those same 2 examples, or if I look at another right triangle, if I have, this is 5, right angle, and this is 12, We saw this Pythagorean triple in our last chapter. And if this one is 10, right angle, 24, we know because of side angle side that those are also going to be similar triangles, and they're going to be not just proportional sides, but then that turns into, hey, these angles must be congruent to one another, these two angles must be congruent to one another, and these two sides are also proportional. So once we know the triangles are similar, then it turns into all that other stuff that we know along with them, meaning all those corresponding angles are congruent and all of those corresponding sides are proportional. So when I look at my next two examples, are these two triangles, now it tells us they're scalene, are they similar? Well, again, I have 10, and here's 11, and then we have a 94 and a 94, and then a 15 and a 13. If these sides are proportional, then that would be our side angle side. The thing we have to look at then is, are those two sides proportional to one another? So we know that side angle side is one of our shortcuts, so we have that information. Now the other part, remember, the sides must be proportional. So 10 and 11 would correspond, and then the 13 and the 15. So when I set up my proportion for this, we would have 10 over 11 and 15 over 13 lining up those corresponding sides. Obviously, 10 over 11 is not equal to 15 over 13. So when I have 10 over 11 and then 15 over 13, those would not be corresponding. Those triangles would not be similar. And in our last example, we're looking at which rule does help us to show if these scalene triangles are similar. So again, I've got a 36 here and a 36 here. All right, we've got a 50 here and then some unknown angles, although we would have vertical angles, and we know vertical angles are always congruent to one another. So when we're looking at that, we would be able to say that these two angles would actually be, we would be able to say that angle VSW is congruent to angle UST because they are vertical angles. So now, because of the 36 and 36 here and then our congruent vertical angles, we would know that these two triangles would be similar by angle-angle.